Hey, boys and girls, welcome to Social Studies. I hope you're having a great day. So, we've been on a break from our book, and you guys have been doing some different activities in Miss Richards, and I really hope that you guys have enjoyed getting a little bit more hands on ish. We hope to be able to continue some of those fun activities and some partner work. So, hopefully, it worked out for you well, and you were able to physical distance while learning some new things in social studies. Today we are back to the book. We're continuing our study of humans. So it gets pretty interesting now, and I hope that you find this inspiring and maybe some questions will arise for you that you want to know more about. So let's just go ahead and take a look. You don't have to have anything open right now. If you're just looking at the screen, that would be fantastic. So this is chapter 2, and this will be posted in Google Classroom. You know how to get there. It'll be a new topic or a new folder, and you'll be able to see chapter 2 as a material for you. But I wanted to go over, I told you that you would have some questions at the beginning of every chapter and throughout the chapter that are supposed to help you think and ponder and make some ideas. So while I read these and you see them on your screen, consider some of the ideas that you might have about these questions, or some of the ideas that you want to know more about, or maybe you have some answers. So ponder this as we look through these. Number 1, why might humans want to move from an area? You might have personal experience with that. I know several of the students in my crew have moved from different places, and there's reasons for that. What are those? Number 2, what might attract people to a new place? What are some good things that a person might want to come to a new area for? And you can think about modern day and ancient times. Number 3, why did humans start migrating out of Africa around 100,000 years ago? We're going to talk about that. What would push some people out? There must have been some kind of a change, I would assume. Maybe not. What is meant by Paleolithic and Neolithic ways of life? We'll be taking a dive into those two, and you'll be doing a couple projects relating to that. How have Paleolithic and Neolithic patterns of life differed between the people of Africa, Western Europe, Asia, and North America? So they're saying in different regions, how are those lifestyles different? And I'm sure right off the bat, when you're thinking, well, Africa compared to, say, North America, their climate's not the same. So that's one thing. You could do that right away. You would know something about that right off the bat. I'm sure there are some other things we'll take a look at too. Number 6, what benefits did early human farmers gain over hunter-gatherers? So we're going to compare the hunter and gathering lifestyle with the lifestyle of being farmers, pros and cons. Then we're going to go down to number 7, how did the natural environment affect the places early human farmers chose to live? Okay, and then I'm just thinking about that one right off the bat. When I watch some of those shows, I don't know if you guys have seen that show about people living in Alaska. It's a brutal climate there. It's hard to grow things. It's hard to survive. You have to have a certain garb to be able to go outside at certain times of the year. They have a very short season for getting things done where it's not bitter cold. When it is bitter cold, they have so many challenges. So I'm wondering how that information, just from me watching a TV show, might influence your ideas on number 7, that environmental effect. It has a big deal on how successful people are. And that's just a little glimpse is the climate. But what about resources in that area? What about animals and things that can grow? And I don't know, what else are you thinking about? We'll take an examination of that. And then number 8, what was the relationship between stable food supplies and the development of settlements? That seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? Well, you need food for people to be able to live. So there has to be stable food for people to live in an area. But is there more to it? We'll find out. So that's the beginning of our chapter. What factors and conditions are most significant for creating times of innovation and growth? That's what we're going to be studying. Blah, blah, blah. That's a lot of verbiage right there to say we're checking out how people started to live. But before that, we want to take a look at how we group time. So on our geohistogram, we noticed that we group places by regions. And I told you that not all maps, not all regions are always divided up the same. So it depends on what you're talking about. Different map makers, different topics, different professors may group regions differently depending on what they're talking about. And time is like that too. So let me just show you this. On this little chart right here, it says the eras going across the top, and then the dates going across here, the approximate dates, and then a little description. Basically, what this chart is saying, we take chunks of time and group them together, basically based on what was approximately happening during that time frame. In this time frame, mostly this was happening. So this is called, for example, prehistory. And then in another set of time, things changed and things got varied up. So we have to have another grouping of time, and that is called ancient history. And then Middle Ages and modern history. Throughout each of those, there's a common thread in each one of those eras, grouping it together. Of course, there are differences too in that time frame, but there's something in common that keeps that time frame together. And then they gave some approximate dates in there. And that is how we can say, in general, something happened. Instead of saying, oh, in 3000 BCE, blah, blah, blah happened, you can just say in prehistory. And I'll know in that basic time frame, we are talking about prehistory. So you can start to just say an approximate time. The same thing with regions on a map. I can say in North America. I don't need to say in the town of, in the state of Mississippi. I could just say in North America, and you'll know the approximate area I'm talking about. And that's why we do that, to make things easier. We have regions, we have eras to say. We can talk about a whole grouping of time just to make it easier. We don't have to be so specific. That might be hard to think about. That might be hard to consider, especially because we don't know what prehistory, ancient history, Middle Ages, and modern history maybe really is. Let me put it to you in a way that is maybe a little bit easier. Take a look at this example. So my life chapters, in other words, maybe we could say eras, in the little eras in your life. So you have divisions in your life too. You have groupings in your life. Here's one possible example of the groupings in your life. You could talk about the time before you were in school. You're an infant, you're a toddler. That was a chapter in your life before you started school. Then you went to preschool. You started learning how to intermingle with people. Now I know some of you are saying, I didn't go to preschool. You get the idea. Then you moved on to elementary. So in elementary school, you know your approximate age. Approximately from the kindergarten or first grade on to fifth grade is when you spend time in elementary. So when you're talking to your grandma, you might just say, when I was back in elementary school. And she'll know, oh yeah, I know the approximate time that my grandchild is talking about. Now you're in middle school. Another era or chapter could be high school, college, your job that you get, college or trade school, I should say, the job that you get, and then on to retirement, hopefully. So this could be the way that you set up the chapters in your life to show a span through time. And it's just one way you can do it. You could also divide your life up into when I lived in North Carolina, when I lived in the UP of Michigan, when I moved to Illinois, when I moved back to Michigan. You could divide your time up like that, perhaps, if you've moved a lot. Maybe you want to do it before you broke your leg and after you broke your leg. Maybe before you got sick, while you were sick, and after you were sick. There's lots of different ways to divide things up. And this is just an example of how you could do your life. And this is the example of what we're going to use in our class for the study for this year. We're grouping things up to make things easier. We're going to start off our studies in prehistory. So, we also know that timelines keep things in chronological order. We see that with the geohistogram. On the left side, you guys practiced using that these past couple weeks, and you were able to see time being chronologically kept on the left side, and it makes sense. Things are in order, and that's a good thing. There's a couple interactives here. You don't need to touch on those now, but later on when you're working on your assignment, you may want to click through these and kind of have fun looking at those. We're just going over the basics right now in the chapter, so no need for us to click on those now, but this is an interactive timeline you can mess around with if you would like. So we're going to go ahead and talk about a couple of different things. First, I just want to take note that in our society we use the Gregorian calendar, and that's the most of what the Western world uses, but that is not the only calendar that people can use. So you may want to take note of that. It's the one that most of us are familiar with, but there are other options out there. We're not going to do the activity this year that kind of looks through those. So you can take an independent study of that. And like I said, you can click on those to kind of this one in particular to kind of do that later on if you so choose. Also making note that there is some evidence that perhaps, the Gregorian calendar that we use is based off the birth of Christ, which makes it 0. However, we've talked about this briefly before. There is some evidence that that timing is actually a little off, and it just mentions in the book here, don't worry, no one will be changing the timeline. We have to change our birth dates and all the other dates, so we're not going to do that, but just as a piece of information, there could be a miscalculation in that Gregorian calendar, but we all just go along with it anyway. Then we're talking about right here, we're moving on to prehistory. Prehistory is the time before writing. Long time ago. No writing. How the heck do scientists know what happened before there was writing? Before there was anything? Before there were typewriters? Before there was pencils? Before there was anything? How do we know? How are these things documented? How are scientists figuring this stuff out? We've talked about this a little bit. They have to use clues. They have to put the pieces of the puzzle together in order to be able to figure out what happened. And what are the pieces of the puzzle? There's no actual puzzle. What are those pieces? There's artifacts to put together. Let's just take a look at this right here. Here are some examples of some different types of artifacts and fossils that are used to be able to put the pieces together. Here's what gets a little tricky. You might, as a scientist, you might find a pile like this, or some of these things, or some of these things, but now you have to interpret what they are. If I pick up something in particular and I look at it, I might think, oh my gosh, what is that? For example, I might find this in my archaeological dig, and I might think that this is a very cool way to stir their potions that they made in prehistory. And my colleague may say, well, wait a minute, what's this tip for? Maybe they used it to kill people. And then somebody else might say, well, wait a minute, it leaves a mark. Maybe they used it for making tattoos. So this, although it's found and it's cool and it's useful, it has to still be interpreted for its use because we are in the time of prehistory, before things were written down, and we don't know what this was exactly used for. So you have to keep that in mind as we're going through these ideas. So scientists use things from that they found, artifacts, fossils, to have evidence to draw conclusions to say, I think this was used as a writing tool. It leaves behind a mark, it's sharpened, and I found something next to it that shows that this material on top was on that piece of thing next to this thing, and I'm drawing a conclusion that I think that this was used to write. So that's how scientists kind of go through their process. Of course, it's very complex, and they use carbon dating, and they use different things, but that's just a simplified example. And right now we're going up into here, and if you just notice, we've said this before, prehistory is sometimes referred to as the Stone Age because guess what? Humans used stone tools. I told you, I love that it's called the Stone Age because it uses stone tools, and that makes sense. That name makes sense. So if we go here, what are the characteristics of some of the things about the Stone Age? Well, in the Stone Age, people lived in small groups. They hunted, they gathered food, they made simple shelters from the environment. Let's see what else. Oh, they found the materials in the environment. And that is kind of some of the markers for prehistory. We're going to do a little activity with that, and we're going to notice those characteristics of prehistory a little more in detail shortly, but this is just an overview. We also know from scientific evidence so far that the oldest human fossils have been found in East Africa, suggesting that that's where humans have first lived. That's a theory because there could be other fossils in different places that just haven't been found yet, right? There could be older ones in other areas, but as of now, the oldest human fossils have been found in East Africa. So we are going to see a map in a moment that's going to help us understand that a little bit better as well. So if we're talking about migration, we're talking about, I just gave away the answer. If we're talking about Africa and East Africa being the spot where some of these oldest human fossils have been found, how do people get across the world? Well, I just gave you the answer, migration. But really wondering, why would people leave, right? So even though we know, and I'm just putting my cursor right here, I could put that little writing tool, yeah. Okay, so right here. So even though the geological evidence suggests with fossils and artifacts that the oldest or the earliest humans lived in Africa, we know that they migrated out of there. We know that for sure that we still don't live there, and so that it must be that things have changed and people moved on. So why would people do that? What would cause those groups of people to want to move on? What would invigorate them to want to move? If they had things figured out, if they were hunting and gathering, they had their simple shelters, what would make a group of people want to move? So we're just looking in here, and we're going to notice the word migrating is bold because it's a vocabulary word, and that means to move on to a different spot. And there are a couple of different ways that people can migrate or reasons, and we'll talk about those towards the end. But let's see. Just noticing a couple things about this section. So we could see in that video how the land was exposed when the ice sheets formed and they were frozen and the water from the ocean dropped. And then we can see once the ice started to melt, how that land was then covered up once again and people were so-called stuck in those areas. Okay, so moving on from that, and you can watch that video several times. It's in your book, so you will have access to that to rewatch it as many times as you'd like. This was the map I promised to show you. We're going to get more into this map later on. I'm not going to spend tons of time right now because we're going to do an activity with it, and this video is quite long enough, I'm sure you're thinking. But this is that area that they just demonstrated in that little video. So humans were then able to walk across and come down into the Americas, and I'll show you how these numbers work. But a quick little preview. 9 is where the oldest human fossils have been found as of now. And from there, as you count down, that is humans migrating across to different areas. So you can see they went from 9 to 8, from 9 to 8, from 9 to 8 to 7. And so 9 to 8 to 7. That's the progression of how humans moved. And then we can see 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. And obviously you would expect the further away, the longer it took, the more time it took, the more generations it took. So they get further and further away. And then we can see traveling across Asia, and we can see down into what's now Australia. And this area was tricky because we had to have the Ice Age again to be able to allow people to walk across and get to these different islands. And then, of course, this area right here, traveling across the strait and then coming on down through North and South America. And, of course, South America's got a 1 because it took people a very, very long time to get there. If we are writing our stuff on the theory of humans leaving from East Africa. So that would obviously take a very long time, thousands of years, lots of trials and tribulations to get all the way here. Then we can talk about some reasons for migration, and we can talk about how sometimes migration happens because you are pulled into a certain area. You are wanting to go to a certain area. Something looks very appealing to you. Something is good to you. You want to move and migrate because there is, in this case, better health care. There's more money to be made. You've got more jobs. You're interested in the city life or the country life. Ooh, food. I love food. Maybe it's more peaceful. You don't have to worry about so much conflict. You want to get a different type of education. So that those are all pull factors. A pull is something positive that pulls you towards something. On the other hand, you can have push factors. Basically, you can't stay there. It is not possible to stay there. Example, climactic disasters. There's a bad drought. You cannot grow crops for time after time, season after season. Perhaps there's a war. Goodness gracious, we've seen that in the Middle East. People they packing up all of their stuff and they're trying to leave. They're in different camps to try and be able to survive war. Poverty. So poverty is not having enough money to really live. So I know sometimes we say, oh, I'm so poor, I don't get to get those Jordan shoes, but not that kind of poverty. We're talking about poverty where we don't have enough to eat, where we're hungry more than we're not, when our clothes don't fit, when we're dirty. So that's poverty, when you need to move on because you don't have enough to survive and live properly. So in this section, boys and girls, holy cow, we've covered lots of different things. We've covered so many things. We've covered about how scientists group time, and that for this book, we're going to be talking about prehistory, ancient history, Middle Ages, and modern history. And our main study will be prehistory and ancient history. That's where we'll spend most of our time. We have talked about how timelines help us to organize time and to see things in perspective. We've talked about how in prehistory, when there's no writing, and there's no documentation, scientists have to use fossils and artifacts to be able to piece together what happened, what could have happened, what might have happened, lots of theories that have been proven right and proven wrong over time. So we'll be talking about that and how interesting that is. And by the way, that changes all the time. I have an email to myself about an article that was just talking about another discovery in China. They've discovered a whole other civilization in China that they didn't even know existed, and it's become uncovered. And so now scientists and archaeologists are having to rewrite some of what they thought was true to modify it a little bit because there's more information, there's more evidence. Then we talked about the words fossils and migrating. Those are some vocabulary words we'll investigate and look at a little bit more closely. And then we talked about the ice sheets and the ice age and how that allowed people to walk to other areas that they wouldn't have been able to walk to otherwise. And then why do people even want to walk there? Well, because there's push and pull factors. There are different reasons that cause people to want to leave and go to a new area. And then we saw what scientists believe to be the pattern of the ancient past from people walking and migrating to different parts of the world through time. And we'll do an activity with this coming up. And then the visual of some of those migration reasons. So thank you for listening today. I know it was a very long video today, and that is just getting us set up so that we can use our information to move forward to do some other projects. So thank you for listening. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll be back with some ideas on how to use these thoughts. Thank you.